Next, we'll move to Keith Grogan, who's going to talk about mission formulation, because now that you've heard about what, NASA offers in terms of money and sort of where they get ideas from the decadal, Keith can actually tell you a little bit about that. So yes, you just want to turn it on. Top.
So
That top, yep.
not the other top.
Not the other top. And Keith, talking about shifting around, when I learned that Keith thought about protoplanetary disks and other disks, it made my heart swell because I was like, yes, you're not just looking for the next big Earth-like planet like everybody else. I always felt very sad as a grad student. So this is just to say you move around in careers a lot as you go. So take it away.
Thanks. Is this working? People hear me? Okay, and I just forward this by
Big button.
big button. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. My name's Keith Grogan. I'm the program manager at JPL for astronomy and physics mission formulation. Actually, we cover both astrophysics and heliophysics. And in that job, I and the team I work with, folks across JPL actually, work quite broadly with the astronomy and community to help define and develop concepts that may ultimately, we hope, mature to be the next set of space missions that fly in the future. And if that job sounds kind of cool to you, you'd be right, or at least I would agree with you. And if you were to ask me, I mean, if you could rewind time and ask my, I don't know, 18, 20, 25, you could actually maybe even go a little higher, version of myself, whether I'd be standing here giving you a talk about how, mission formulation works at NASA, then yeah, I would have thought, really? Because what you've heard today, and I don't think I'm any exception, is that careers can be kind of, I don't know, stochastic nature to them sometimes. Those sliding doors moments that take you in a completely different direction that you never thought you were gonna embark on. I am from the UK originally. Didn't even know if I was going to do astronomy at first. It was kind of a toss-up between astronomy and medicine. I wanted to do astronomy. Everybody else in my life wanted me to do medicine. It was a bit of a tug of war. Maybe some of you are familiar with that kind of background as well. I guess you can figure out how that turned out. I ended up being selfish and did what I wanted to do. I did my undergrad at St. Andrews in Scotland. And then I showed up in the US. And I suppose I felt the pull of the American orbit at a pretty young age. I knew NASA existed, obviously. And I thought that maybe, I suppose, looking back on it, I don't think I was being so definitive about it at the time, but maybe I thought that, being at least physically closer to it might give me a bit of a better opportunity to actually be part of it one day. So I did my PhD at the University of Florida. Again, like you've heard a lot today, I applied to a bunch of places and just kind of saw what came out in the wash. A few grad schools in the US admitted me, but Florida was the only place that said, we'll actually kind of give you a teaching assistantship as well. Otherwise, I would have had to pay my own way somewhere else. And that probably wasn't going to happen back when I was 22 and absolutely penniless. So, so I ended up at UF. And from there, a couple of postdocs, I stayed on at UF because go Gators. Florida and Gainesville is fantastic. I had a lot of work to do with my PhD advisor at the time, still to finish after he let me graduate in a timely way. God bless you, Stan. But we still had work to do, so I stayed for a couple more years. And then I went to Goddard for my first postdoc. My scientific background, when I was a PhD student, I worked a lot on our local zodiacal cloud, which is, our very own example of a debris disk around a star, right? So a lot of the work and the techniques that I use to understand the kind of the dynamics and evolution of the zodiacal cloud, then I started to think about in the context of other stars. And, I went to Goddard to do that for a couple of years. And then I think Chaz had something to do with bringing me over to JPL, where I started as a research scientist. And even though I loved the research I was doing, I was at JPL and I thought, JPL, we do missions here, right? How do I get involved in that more? And I just had a conversation with my boss at JPL at the time, the kind of the lead of the group I was in. And he said, hey, if you want to learn more about missions, go over to the engineering division. It seems like they're looking for what we call JPL group supervisors, for the people who work in systems engineering, specifically in formulation. So I thought, well, don't quite know how that's relevant to me, but I'll go. And all of a sudden, within a couple of weeks, I was leading a group of about 20 systems engineers doing mission formulation. Don't know how they felt about that at the time. I'm not a systems engineer, I'm a scientist. But the idea was that, why do we do these missions in the first place? We want to push back the frontiers of knowledge, right? And in doing that, we kind of have to understand when we're formulating missions, what the scientific motivation for them actually is, and bringing the science and the engineering and those technical communities together to understand how each community thinks. That's kind of a good thing in the end. So that was the job I had at first. And then I went through a couple of other positions at JPL. I was in a organization within JPL called the Innovation Foundry, which is really at the tip of the spear for defining and setting best practices for how we win new work at JPL, whether it's relatively small research proposals or whether it's huge flight mission proposals. And now I'm in the job that I mentioned earlier on. Okay, so what's the landscape we work in, right? These are all of the mission classes that that NASA defines for us and that we work towards implementing for the future. And you've heard a lot about the decadal survey. And over here on the left-hand side, decadal survey class missions tend to be pretty meaty, right? They tend to be quite expensive. And, right now we're in a position where we're starting to try and define what the next, or at least a future flagship class mission will be. And I think I'm going to talk about HAB worlds coming up. There's going to be some discussion about that. That kind of work at that class and that level tends to be directed by headquarters to specific institutions to implement. All of the rest of the opportunities on this slide are all competed. That is, if anybody's got a good idea, write a proposal and make a case, right? And so that's the work, that's the other part of the work assigned and then competed. From the very large, we've got a new class of mission called the probes, which, again, quite chunky, $1 billion plus. And those proposals are in review right now, and headquarters is deciding which ones are going to go forward right now. And we'll find out about that within a couple of months, I think. All the way down here, and they kind of go down in cost cap and scope, if you like. And really, I think headquarters' motivation here is that as you go down in class, these smaller ones, the pioneers, CubeSats, these are proving grounds for the next generation of scientists and engineers who want to work on the bigger stuff in the future, right? So don't think that, mission formulation and being part of these missions is only for those people who are really far along in their careers. We're always looking, headquarters is always looking for the next generation, and there's ways to get involved in some of these opportunities in order to do that. Okay. I won't talk too much about the decadal surveys. Tiffany talked about them. There's a long history of decadal surveys in astrophysics. But the decadal surveys tend to be quite prescriptive about the missions at the big end of that, on the left-hand side of that last chart that I just showed. Everything else is up for grabs, really. Just, you've got a good idea, propose it. Let's see how far it can go. And this slide just shows you the kind of, as of, I don't know, quite recently, I think well, it's current. the astrophysics fleet, from the very large scale things all the way down to the very small missions that are flying CubeSats, that are doing great science and proving new technology for the future. Okay. So, like I say, the question is, and the work I do, and maybe some of the things that you can think about, is what's going to get added to this chart over time. Okay. So I'm going to talk about competed formulation for the rest of the talk, and I'm actually not going to spend too much time talking. I'll get us back on schedule, and I'm going to be here later, and I'm happy to talk with everybody. I could talk about this for a long time. Actually, there's lots to talk about. But one of the things, I just wanted to spend some time talking about how flight proposals are different to the kind of research proposals that you may be familiar with writing yourself. Okay. And just kind of the fact that it's just a different beast. And specifically, first of all, it is very much a team sport. The PI isn't responsible. Well, ultimately, technically, the PI is responsible for the success of any mission. But in terms of formulating it, not just the PI, anyone that works on one of these efforts, nobody can do this alone. Nobody has everything in their head that can make one of these things successful, one of these efforts successful. And I think that wherever you work, there are several institutions across the US that really act typically as the lead centers for mission formulation efforts. Of course, Goddard is one, JPL is another, NASA Ames is another, APL over at Johns Hopkins is another, Southwest Research Institute, there's a list. I'm probably, you know, we all kind of do this a little differently. But one of the ways to think about how formulation works in terms of it being a team effort is that there are a bunch of people that I always need to bring to bear to make a formulation effort work. And obviously the PI and the science team that goes along with the PI is absolutely responsible for defining scientifically what the mission is going to do, what the scientific ambition is. But then there's also an engineering team that has to kind of have those, you know, grounding type conversations to say, well, you know, maybe that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we can do for the resources available for this particular competition. I haven't really met a scientist yet who's run out of ambition before they run out of dollars that's available to do one of these things, right? What's the most we can do? And that's natural, that's normal, right? But we've still got to make it seem feasible in the end. We can't make it sound like, okay, there's only a couple of $100 million for this opportunity, but it'll actually cost $1 billion. Everybody's going to see through that. So we've got to manage it appropriately, right? So there are all of these roles, and you know, whether it's the capture lead, who is somebody that we bring in to organize the overall effort, or the proposal manager, who is ultimately responsible for the single document that's going to make or break your idea. You know, you can't put a stamp on your forehead and go to headquarters and talk, unfortunately. You have to send in a proposal. And the proposal needs to be written with empathy in terms of, you know, who's your audience? I mean, that's kind of good advice no matter what kind of piece of writing you're putting together. Understand your audience. We're trained as scientists to write in a very specific way, in a very learned, dense, you know, your peers can understand it. Your mom appreciates it, at least. But, you know, when you put a flight proposal in, that proposal is going to be read by people who are not experts in what you think you know about, right? Your specific area of expertise. It's going to be read by engineers, by cost analysts. It's going to be read at headquarters by people who aren't even in astrophysics, ultimately. They're going to be in different areas of science, and they all want to agree on what the best missions are to do. So you have to write it in a way that brings everybody in. And that's not easy for a lot of people. And that's an ongoing effort to kind of retrain ourselves about how we talk about science. But it's one that's really worthwhile. Other aspects of what makes a great flight proposal, and the kind of the aspects that we all have to think about and all have to do better on all the time. You have to demonstrate that the science that you want to do is something that the community actually wants, right? If you're the only person that, is out in a very esoteric corner of a very specialized domain of science, it might be fascinating. But if there is not as much of a groundswell behind that versus something else, then it becomes difficult to get selected. So you certainly have to make sure that the goals and objectives that you have are traceable to the kind of documents, the decadal surveys that you've heard about today. Okay. Of course, you need a strong PI. Of course, you need somebody who's a recognized leader in the field. But that, a PI isn't an island, and they need to be supported by a broad, by a diverse science team. And then the rest of it, I've put a few bullets here about science traceability, and I won't go through them. All that I'll say about that is that if you're asking for, say, $300 million of the US taxpayers' money, there's a certain humility that should come along with that, right? I mean, I know it's not a word that goes along with the science community very often, and I can say that being one. But, seriously, it's a very serious endeavor. And when the money can go either here or there, science traceability is all about explaining in a very clear way why what you're proposing to do is worthwhile. That's all. And it's all about being able to state very clearly in your field what the state of the art is, exactly what data that you're going to bring back, and how specifically that's going to advance that state of the art. And if you can do that clearly enough, you're most of the way there. It's the most difficult part of all of this. And it takes a while to get your head around it, get used to it. Some people take to it easier than others. Okay. I know we don't have too much time left, but I'll just slide about getting involved, right? You've heard some of this today already. First of all, just interesting exercise, right? Go on to Inspires, where all of the proposal opportunities are listed. Read one of these mission opportunities, right? Just look up, type in Explorers, search for it in Inspires. Have a look. I don't want to scare you off, but have a look through it and just see that just the scope and the scale and the breadth of the work and the expertise that is necessary to pull this off. It's really exciting, but it's also broad, and necessarily it takes you outside of your comfort zone. And if you like that kind of thing, this is good work for you. As you've already heard, people need to know you exist, right? I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing to say. So networking, as you've heard, is key. There are ways and structures to do that, which you've heard about. Program scientists, I think there's at least one of those around today. Network of contacts outside your own institution. Talk to people when you go to meetings. Talk to people who are not within your own group and get known. Find a mentor with flight experience as you expand this network. Who's actually worked on a mission proposal? Who's actually worked on a flight project? How did that go? Can I shadow you if you're still working on that? Maybe I can get involved. And just talk about your own ideas. Don't keep them to yourself. Too often people get afraid that, oh, really, should I put this idea out in the open? Maybe it's not ready. The right time to do that's always right now, I think. And take advantage of opportunities that NASA are funding to learn more about mission formulation, right? The first one is the Science Mission Design Schools that have been running at JPL now for, well, in planetary science for the last 30 plus years. And recently we've expanded these to cover both astrophysics and heliophysics as well. Okay, and what these design schools are, they're essentially a 3-month-long opportunity. It's kind of the level of a grad school course, where there's going to be a lot of online seminars that teach you all about mission formulation, what it takes, and some aspects of it are listed here. And then it all culminates in a week at the end at JPL, working with TMEX, which is our concurrent design engineering group, where each student is shadowing one of the chairs of TMEX as we put this whole thing together. And at the end of the week, you get to present the concept in front of a review panel of people from headquarters, from JPL, from Goddard, from various places, right? Which is kind of cool. So not only does that itself give you a lot of visibility, it also teaches you hands-on a lot about the formulation process, a lot more than I can go into in 20 minutes today, this afternoon. That's the website. Sorry, I don't have those fancy QR codes for you, but go.nasa.gov/mission design schools is the website for that one. And then the final thing I'll talk about is NASA's PI Launchpad. Well, I suppose the driving force behind the PI Launchpad is Erica Hamden at the University of Arizona. She's a relatively early career scientist who wanted to get involved in mission formulation, had ideas, but found it difficult to just, who do I talk to? How do I take this forward? What's the network? Who are the contacts, right? So she became, frustrated enough by that, that she worked with headquarters and some other folks, some of us at JPL, to put together this opportunity that comes around every couple of years. And really, you can think of the PI Launchpad as a kind of an extended version of this afternoon, right? It's, or at least my talk that I've been talking about today. What kind of aspects do you need to think about and keep in mind when you're putting a mission concept together, or how it comes together, what the right network of contacts is to try and start generating, okay? How do you network with NASA centers and with industry in order to get these things going? The folks that maintain, run, organize the PI Launchpad are planning the next iteration of this for next summer. And you should keep track of their website, which is here on the bottom, as breaking news comes out as to where that's going to be and when it'll get listed there. Okay, so that's just some more opportunities for you to learn more, and I'll be here later to talk to you about anything you like. So that's all I have for now. Happy to take questions.